English translation. 445th contact. Thursday, 8th of March 2007, 22:28 hours.
Be greeted, Edward.
My greetings to you too, dear friend. Ava has just gone out and gone to the apartment. What Anjana said immediately occurred to me, that if you came this early, you would impulse Ava to go to bed. It is just unusual that she goes over so early because it usually happens long after midnight. That is why Anjana's words immediately came to my mind that you would bring your impulses into play, which you actually did, if I am not mistaken.
You are not mistaken, my friend. But let me start talking about what brought me here, because it is important that you are informed about it. Your hunch was right.
I am not surprised. It is just unfortunate that it has been kept from me for several months. It was only a hunch on my part, but as your explanation now shows, I was right. The behavior is deplorable.
Yes, you said that already then, which is why I clarified it and told you the result now. But it would not be good if you talk about it openly at this point. You should only do that when the time has come, precisely when it has turned out that the behavior is truly deplorable, as you say.
Then I will omit the passages relating to that unfortunate thing. Call it up and add it to the conversation report later. I can still do it later on, perhaps. That, of course, always provided that it should be necessary to speak a frank word about it.
That is a possibility you can reserve for yourself. But I think it is very regrettable, and testifies to a lack of trust and not exactly friendship, that in such a case there is room for concealment.
Unfortunately, you are right, but many humans of the Earth see friendship only in the context of a specific purpose, precisely when it is for their own good and for their own profit. For my part, I call this friendship of convenience, but even as a small boy, I learnt not to let it bother me, but to simply take people as they really are, or as they give themselves to be. This has saved me a lot of trouble, disadvantages, suffering, pain, and disappointment in my life. But it has also given me the advantage of recognizing honest love and affection from truly friendly people of both sexes, to enjoy it and feel comfortable in their presence.
My father Svath told me about how you already dealt with these factors when you were a boy, and how you already benefited from them at a young age. Therefore, I understand your words very well and can understand them.
Then there is no need for any further explanation, so I can raise a question about the way the Pleiaren dress. What I have seen in everyday life on Era in this regard was that women, children, and men dress in an appropriate moral form. So I have not seen any of them walking around half naked, or even completely naked. But what does it look like when you take a bath? During a kitchen talk on the 21st of February, the following question was put to me about this, which I could not answer, because during my short visit to Era, I did not see very much, which refers to the question, nudity in public. What is the acceptable limit of clothing for the Pleiaren? If you can tell me in a few words the most important things relating to that question, I would be happy to.
I can do that, of course. We Pleiaren are always so fully clothed in public that there are no parts of the body freely visible that could be sexually provocative to the opposite sex. When bathing in public, a sparse bathing costume is worn, of course, but this is kept within chaste and ethical or moral limits with regard to the nakedness of the body. Therefore, it is neither customary nor permissible to wear lewd clothing in everyday life, or when swimming in public waters or in facilities intended for that purpose, nor to go half naked or completely naked. Semi or full nakedness is only given in an intimate manner in living communities or special friendships, but never in public. In the case of special friendships, it should be noted that half or full nudity is only justified if the friendship of both sexes exists in a purely platonic form without any sexual intent. Morality has a very high value for us Pleiaren, which is why the ethical forms are strictly maintained and cultivated in every relationship, whereby, of course, prostitution of any form is frowned upon and prohibited by law.
In communities, are there any taboos or rules?
There can be no question of that, because private life is inviolable in every respect when it takes place within the framework of legislation.
By that, I mean that a community is run in all things legal, according to a specific community law. So there must be no violations of the rights of cohabitation in any form whatsoever. It should be remembered that this applies to both same-sex and opposite-sex partnerships, right? Besides, I suppose that this legislation has nothing to do with the state laws?
You see everything in the right wise.
Years ago, we privately talked about the so-called chemtrails. Contrails from airplanes, which are used by conspiracy theorists to drive humans who believe in them crazy and terrified by writing idiotic books and making horrendous money. This is what happened with the alleged photon belt, etc., which misled the humans. I have received inquiries about this, as well as about the alleged protocols of the wise men of Zion, which I will answer in a special bulletin. For this I took all the information I received during our conversation at that time, at least as far as I could remember, and wrote the following, which you are kindly requested to read and then tell me what is right or wrong and what I need to mention further. Your opinion on this is important to me. Here, please.
Ptah reads,
Answer regarding the protocols of the wise men of Zion. Bookworks and writings, such as the so-called Protocols of the Wise Men of Zion, are the worst slanderous works. They are invented conspiracies for the purpose of slandering, persecuting, and destroying the people of the Jewish faith. Virtually all writings and books of this kind bear witness to a confused Nazi, political, extreme right-wing and religious fanaticism of the most degenerate kind, generally aimed at denigrating the Jewish faithful and fomenting hatred for Jews and the destruction of Israel. The whole thing is absolute nonsense, although certain financial magnates are Jews, as are those active in the economic and political world. But seen in relation to other humans of other faiths, this probably balances itself out again. So when Jews outside Israel are active in many countries of the world in the economic, financial and political spheres, they do not constitute a sovereign in one form or another, which could lead to a derivation of national power or something similar. Through misinformation and racial and xenophobic hatred, hatred of foreigners and faith, etc., the Jews have from time immemorial been unjustly insulted and held responsible for all existing and non-existing evils, for everything that is abnormal, incorrect, and for all other evil and negative things that are and will be done in relation to the financial, economic, and political world, etc. The Christian religion in particular plays the most decisive role, in which the hatred of Jews was fundamentally born, and that from the crucifixion of Christ, which was taken as a reason for hatred against the Jews and for their persecution at an early stage. But the fact that the henchmen who arrested Emmanuel alias Jesus Christ in his time were just as much Romans and so-called idolaters, see Roman mythology, as the author of the death sentence, Pontius Pilate, is deliberately overlooked, as is the fact that the executioners were also of Roman blood. At that time, the Jews were under Roman thumb and had to do and let do what they were told. This also applied to the Jewish scribes and to the Pharisees, etc., for they all had to dance to the Roman violin, which was played by the occupiers and rulers of the country and the people. Although at that time the scribes and priests of the Jewish faith deliberately had their fingers in the crucifixion of Emmanuel, because he raged against their erroneous teachings. That is, the Romans came to them just in time to accuse Emmanuel of revolt. But basically the Romans were the real culprits, because through them Emmanuel was crucified, after the scribes and priests had incited the rabble to demand the death sentence by incitement. Consequently, it should be clear that it was not the Jews who were really responsible for the crucifixion of Emmanuel alias Christ, but the Romans. This, however, cannot detract from the fact that the ancient Jews, from whom the land of Israel originated, unlawfully took possession of this land thousands of years ago using methods that are not exactly scrupulous, as history proves. See, for instance, the Bible and the Pentateuch, etc. Murder and wars were the order of the day, just as it still is today all over the world, and as it is especially done by the USA under the cloak of fighting terror worldwide in order to establish themselves in foreign countries and to exploit them in every possible form. It is also the case, however, in Israel-Palestine, where Israelis and Palestinians are murdering each other, because neither party can exercise rationality and make a reasonable coexistence and thus an acceptable coexistence effective. As in the earliest days, murder and manslaughter, arson, hatred of peoples and faith, fanaticism and bloodshed still prevail, to the point of total destruction. But how can brain amputees be brought to reason? Because due to the absence of the brain, there is also no intellect and no rationality anymore. If one side tries to make peace efforts, the other side steers against it, and again there is murder, war, and destruction. Nevertheless, however, not every Jew and every Palestinian should be thrown into this pot, for among them, too, there are rational and better-thinking ones, rational ones who are willing to live in peaceful coexistence with one another and who have no hostility whatsoever against those who think differently, against their state neighbors or against any other human beings. The protocols of the wise men of Zion are based on a malicious forgery, which is the basis of modern anti-Semitism. This forgery circulates under various names, but the Protocols of the Elders of Zion is the best known and most enduring document of modern international anti-Semitism. The term forgery must be used with the utmost caution, however, because it is in no wise appropriate for this case, because there is no genuine original, because in the sense of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, it was not a Jewish wise man who produced such a document. But a forgery would be that a genuine document would have had to be fraudulently reproduced as closely as possible to the original in order to pass it off as genuine. With regard to the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, however, there has never been a real original that could have been copied, but it was from the very beginning a pure and smooth invention or a freely found fiction without any truth content. If we dispense with a few half or incomprehensible allusions to French or Russian politics at the turn of the century, the protocol fiction lacks any reference to reality. In fact, it should be possible to think that every only halfways rational and unprejudiced human should have noticed the absurd, frivolous and fantastic nature of the text of the Protocols of the Wise Men of Zion from the very beginning, because the whole thing is extremely badly written and full of extremely tiring repetitions, with no recognizable and logical structure, except for a rough three-theme sequence in relation to liberalism. This is supposed to correspond to the intention of Judaism to seize world domination and create a utopian empire under an absolutist Jewish monarchy. Otherwise, the discourse is lost in contemporary historical jugglery and economic whims. The tiresome repetitions are to be seen purely from a psychological point of view, because through constant repetition the human learns. Or rather, drops fill the glass, because through the endless repetitions, the whole thing hammers itself in, whereby humans, just like when learning through constant repetition, memorizes everything. In the case of the Protocols of the Wise Men of Zion, however, everything is hammered in by the tiring repetitions in such a wise that it evokes thoughts of fear and feelings of anxiety, and thus involuntarily the delusion of a Jewish conspiracy to dominate the world and humankind. For any rational human being, the whole thing should actually appear absurd when the text of the protocol speaks of the fact that the whole political, economic, financial, and social life of the entire earthly humanity and world is not what the human recognizes, experiences, and lives. It is argued that everything is only an illusionary puppet show, run by an invisible and almost omnipotent or all-powerful worldwide conspiracy. For every rational person, such talk is a very familiar feature of a crazy sectarian of extreme right-wing and fanatical character. If a human being, no matter what his or her religious beliefs, has had even little to do with Judaism and with humans of Jewish faith, and has had some experience with it, he or she knows that the image conveyed by the protocols of the wise men of Zion, which is mendaciously attributed to Jews, is completely false and unrealistic. In the introductions of the various editions of the alleged protocols with regard to their discovery and origin, the successive and contradictory explanations describe alleged facts so stupid and far-fetched that they seem not only unbelievable but effectively idiotic. Unfortunately, however, this is not recognized by all humans, especially not by the simple-minded and consciously disadvantaged. But these are not only to be found among the common people, but especially and primarily among the so-called academically educated and other privileged individuals, because they are particularly responsive and susceptible to conspiracy theories, sectarianism, esotericism and religion, etc. And that this is true is proven by the fact that especially guru believers and certain academically educated people join certain sect gurus, kneel before them, lie at their feet or under them on the mattress. The protocols of the wise men of Zion are, of course, in the tradition of the centuries-old or 2,000 years old hatred of Jews. It is a variety of revenge and fear of the Jewish fellow human. Fear and vengeance lurking beneath the surface of society, especially among the extremists and those of Christianity and Islam who are misled by them. Unfortunately, there are still anti-Semitic publishers who print and publish the nonsense of the alleged protocols and take the idiotic conspiracy theory at face value. But those who do this or simply unteachably believe the nonsense are probably not to be saved and taught in their present life, because only humans who are sufficiently imbued with their intellect and their rationality that they can consciously use both can be taught the truth and reality. But where hopeless low intelligentum and dim-wittedness reign, hops and malt are lost. There is probably nothing more to be said about it, because those of low intelligentum and dim-wittedness do not even understand that their intelligence is not even sufficient to be able to distinguish between cleverness and dim-wittedness, which is why the low intelligentum and dim-witted ones think they are intelligent. Answer regarding chemtrails. It has to be said that chemtrails is a new and completely idiotic conspiracy theory that has been circulating for about 7 years now, which is based on the fact that contrails or sublimation trails caused by chemical means are supposed to poison the atmosphere and the life on the Earth. The inventors and supporters of the chemtrail conspiracy theory claim that the condensed aircraft exhaust fumes would contain other chemical additives, and that the added chemicals would serve very specific purposes. All the nonsense of the conspiracy theory is mainly based on the following. Chemtrails are said to be superior to classic contrails in both durability and surface area. So they are not supposed to be normal contrails, but they are supposed to be modified by toxic chemicals, which is why they would spread so wide and be long-lasting. It is said that before 1995 or even earlier, no such phenomenon had been observed, and that consequently no images from earlier times exist that would show such new contrails. Contrary to the normal contrails of aircraft exhaust gases, the chemtrails are not supposed to consist of ice crystals, but of different chemical substances which would cause conspicuously exactly parallel and chessboard-like patterns in the atmosphere, which allegedly do not occur with normal contrails and thus with normal air traffic. The conspiracists' claims are that substances are sprayed over large areas in order to influence climate improvement. To this end, the planes are to spray and spread mainly aluminium and barium compounds, which will help to reduce the sun's radiation, thereby neutralizing the greenhouse effect on Earth caused by the CFCs and greenhouse gases. The conspiracy theories have different variants, which could not be more of low intelligentum and dim-wittedness, and which the conspiracy theorists try to prove by naming renowned experts and scientists who supposedly can provide scientific analyses and explanations for the whole thing. But the rule is that when these eminent experts are searched for to verify the evidence they produce, it suddenly goes up in smoke. Or then these experts and scientists turn out to be delusional esotericists, rotten pseudoscientists and pseudo-experts, or as otherwise overlooked existences that want to be smarter than reality. As with the conspiracy theory that the epidemic AIDS was artificially created in secret laboratories by secret services and governments, etc., in order to stop the overpopulation as far as possible and to exterminate at least 2 or 3 of the earthly humanity, the conspiracy theorists claim that the aims of the alleged chemtrail measures are based on spraying the Earth's population. The purpose of this spraying is, on the one hand, to carry out medical experiments with genetically modified bacteria, but also that the whole thing is based on worldwide birth control in such a way that women and men are to be made infertile by the spraying of the chemicals. Another conspiracy thesis is that the spraying of the population via the airplanes affects the brain and consciousness of the Earth's population in such a form that it is subject to total mind control by governments, authorities, secret societies, and secret services, as well as by the Jews, etc., and can be controlled and manipulated at will. In the case of the Jews, the completely idiotic protocols of the elders of Zion are also used again in this respect, whereby this nonsense provides new material for new conspiracy theories regarding world domination in the form of a world domination by the Jews in general and by the Zionists in particular, who are always mentioned in particular because they are met with great hatred. Although the haters do not know what is behind Zionism at all, Zionism, etc., see bulletins number 14, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, and special bulletin number 34. If the alleged originators of the chemtrails are examined under the magnifying glass, then the range is very broad. At the beginning of the conspiracy theory, which goes back to the 20th century, the USA was considered the criminal creator of chemtrails. Shortly afterwards, the UNO was also considered extremely suspicious, after which the circle of alleged chemtrail perpetrators expanded more and more. Today, even the classic opponents of conspiracy theories are suspected to be guilty. And of course, the FIGU is one of them, because anyone who raves against the conspiracy theorists and their conspiracy nonsense is automatically guilty and involved in the alleged conspiracy. Among the allegedly evil conspirators are also the Freemasons and the Illuminati, as well as the aforementioned alleged Jewish world conspiracy, etc., who are being talked into a lot of nonsense by all the conspiracy theorists, who make a lot of money with their nonsense, which they write down in books, and who frighten their readers. In relation to the chemtrail conspiracy theory, the main criticism is based on the fact that the composition of a condensation trail cannot be determined from the ground. For this reason alone, the allegedly altered composition of the contrails is highly speculative. The truth of the composition and shape, etc., of the contrails as they appear today is based solely on the fact that the greenhouse effect is causing changes that were not there before. So it is not maliciously or by calculation chemicals added to aircraft exhaust gases that determine the form and speed of propagation and the durability of the contrails, but the changed atmospheric conditions in terms of temperature, humidity, and wind speed. For the rational and combinative person with some knowledge of physics, it can be seen that aircraft exhaust particles act as nuclei of crystallization at high humidity and bind further water vapor to spread very far when the wind currents are right. According to the play Aaron, neither aluminium nor barium can be found in the condensation trails of airplanes known as chemtrails, nor in aircraft fuels. And if the conspiracy theorists' assertions were true, then the sun's radiation on Earth would have decreased in recent years as a result of the alleged chemtrails and would not have increased significantly, as has been proven. So this is another way of proving the conspiracy nonsense, because a successful application of the greenhouse effect purifying chemical additives in aircraft fuels, etc., would have had to have had a compensatory effect over all these years. The fact is, however, that the so-called albedo values, or the reflection back into space, decrease, which means that the greenhouse effect does not decrease but continues to increase. The conspiracy theory regarding the chemtrails is not only extremely dubious, but absolutely feeble-minded. But the book-writing conspiracy theorists are financially sound, because the naive ones buy the nonsense books and let themselves be frightened by the nonsense they advertise, which in turn causes them to buy more books. But this truth, as it is proclaimed here, and as many other rational negative statements have also been made, leads to the fact that all this nonsense and hogwash is all the more reason for the naive believers to regard it as proof that the respective secret services, organizations, secret societies, and governments, etc., are actually behind conspiracies and would actually carry them out. So only a few really rational humans take the effective truth as fact, namely that the whole nonsense is only based on conspiracy theories, while the uninitiated and those who are addicted to conspiracy theories feel all the more confirmed in their belief in conspiracy. Belief-based low intelligentum and dim-wittedness are the breeding ground and the characteristic of all conspiracy theories, and low intelligentum and dim-wittedness know no bounds. And what needs to be said further in regard to the alleged chemtrails is that the memory of the adult and average human being on the Earth is quite weak, because how else could it be that such unstable contrails as the alleged chemtrails are claimed to exist? Did not exist before, when no chemicals had been added to aviation fuels to compensate for the greenhouse effect, to take over the control of the Earth's human mind, or to poison humankind, to make it infertile, or even to eradicate at least 2-3 of them. Anyone who is a little bit involved in physics and meteorology knows that contrails are a kind of artificial cirrus cloud that has always existed since airplanes have been flying around in the Earth's atmosphere. But this goes back so far that no one can remember when the first aircraft contrails appeared. But it is clear that at that time there was no alleged organized climate change with regard to the chemtrails, as they were invented by the money-hungry, human-dumbing, and crazy conspiracy theorists. The fact is that vapor trails that remain in the sky are, according to meteorology, clear signs that a weather change is imminent. Thus, even contrails that spread out like a fan, a chessboard, a strip, etc., have nothing to do with alleged chemtrails, but only with atmospheric factors such as temperature, local wind speed, humidity, etc. All alleged chemtrail phenomena can be explained as meteorological phenomena, but also as misinterpretations of good and accurate technical information, which are stylized by conspiracy theorists as fear and frightening ghosts. There is no denying that such conspiracy theories, as in the case of the alleged chemtrails, are fueled by scientific proposals to stop the greenhouse effect and global warming. Condensation trails, and therefore the alleged chemtrails, can only be observed locally all over the world, especially at airports and in aircraft holding patterns, where they are, of course, extremely concentrated, and more so because air traffic is constantly increasing. Logically, therefore, the contrails or alleged chemtrails of aircraft are not as widespread throughout the world as the conspiracy theorists claim, but are confined to the airspace above airports and adjacent areas and to the flight paths of aircraft. This fact, however, is not taken into account because there is no money to be made from it, but only by a stupid conspiracy theory. It should be clear to any sensible person that esotericism and the like must of course be involved, because in these circles, the conspiracy theater about the alleged photon ring and the comet Hale-Bopp took place in a similar context at the turn of the millennium, and a whole series of humans were driven to suicide by this conspiracy nonsense. Of the profit-greedy conspiracy theorists who spread their horrendous nonsense, their actions are irresponsible and criminal. Because with their boundless nonsense, they drive intellectually weak or otherwise inexperienced or believing humans into fear and terror, chase them through 1,000 hells and possibly even to suicide. And that a horrendous business is made with it is part of the daily routine, which is why silly book descriptions are not uncommon, through which conspiracy theories are spread, as is shown in the following pattern: patterns in the sky, evidence of a global threat. Sometimes things are not what they seem. And then behind an impressive cloud formation is a possible, not a natural phenomenon, but a chemical bomb. For several months now, many humans have been experiencing an oppressive feeling when they look at the sky. This is due to mysterious contrails that do not dissolve after a few minutes but become wider, can be seen for hours, or even cover the sky with a gray veil. These chemtrails, derived from contrail, are, according to some experts, visible traces of secret experiments to stop or reverse human-made climate change. Are the chemicals used in these experiments really harmless? Is human collateral damage even relevant in such a gigantic experiment? Is there possibly much more to come? More insidious machinations behind this conspiracy in the sky? The first book on the subject answers some of these questions, and many new ones arise. For not all good things come from above. Well, conspiracy theories are well thought out and targeted manipulations, from which humans start to suffer and fall into fear and terror. Conspiracy theories also manipulate public opinion, which makes the book-writing conspiracy theorists a lot of money. But the humans who let themselves be influenced by the whole thing do not feel well anymore, become insecure, and get even more attached to all the nonsense of the book writers, etc., in order to become conspiracy paranoiacs themselves, like the conspiracy theorists, which often leads to schizophrenic delusions, and therefore things and phenomena are seen and experienced that are not real and do not stand up to any reality check.
It is as usual. Your memory is good, as is the writing here, to which I do not have to add anything.
I will put it in a special bulletin. It will provide clarification for really rational human beings, but not for the conspiracy theorists and their naive followers.
That will be so.
Then a question about predictions. What is there to report?
The dormancy period continues, so there is nothing unusual to report until the 17th of March, when I will come for correction work and another visit. Perhaps something noteworthy will arise by then. If you feel up to it, we can talk a little more over a game of chess.
In private. That is convenient. Good. Here is the game.